What is going on, Badger fans? We got the man on the show today, John Garcia Jr. We're talking Bryson Green. What does he think of that receiver pickup? He's been on top of everything Wisconsin's done this offseason, so we definitely want to pick his brain, figure out where he's at on the Big Ten in the transfer portal as well. Did Wisconsin have the best transfer portal class in the Big Ten? We're going to talk about that next, plus more, on today's Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. Really do appreciate everybody tuning in. As always, we have John Garcia Jr. joining the show. He is Locked On's recruiting insider for college football. Always insightful guest. John, thank you as always, man, for jumping on the show. We got more Badger news to talk about.
Every time, right? There's a new edition or a new topic to jump in on. Always fun, Ryan. And yeah, this is the more you talk about it, the more you get excited about the immediate returns. So excited to jump in.
Yeah, you don't have to tell Badger fans that. Listen, we had a lot of shows in the summer, God love them, where we were talking about what about this prospect like 3 years from now that Wisconsin might be talking to. That's exciting, right?
Yes, of course. Just not the same ratio there for sure.
So let's get into last show we talked about CJ Williams, Bryson Green coming in now. A little more of a seasoned receiver coming in from Oklahoma State, 6'1", about 205, somewhere in that range. What were your thoughts initially, when they picked him up, and then what are your thoughts on his game?
Well, my thoughts when they picked him up were, I'm curious to see how this wide receiver room that is all of a sudden over flooded, how does that play itself out in the spring? And I know Green in particular is there for spring ball, so I think that's really exciting. So that was my initial thought, and then secondarily, I wasn't surprised. I mean, when you bring in all of these quarterbacks in this system, it's going to continue to attract offensive skill position talent. That was probably the safer bet than assuming 3 quarterbacks were going to jump in the portal for Wisconsin all in a very short span. But in terms of his game, look, Green's got a lot. Like you said, there's a lot of polish there. He's established himself as previously one of the better receivers there in the Big 12. I think he's got a nice combination of size, and I love his awareness. When he makes plays, he can do so at the apex, so he tracks the football well. He understands his own body, maximizing that catch radius, and he's also really good in traffic and after the catch. So I really like just his physical ability pre and post receiving the football in and of itself. And then he's also got, in terms of production, he's an upper level guy, but he's also got this clutch element to his game. We all watched that Texas game where he kind of made that decisive catch there, broke a couple tackles there at the end, I believe, to put it up away for good. There's just a lot to like about what he's already put on tape. Not a burner, not a guy who's going to blow the top off of a defense by itself. But when you think of his ability to run routes and the physicality at the catch point, you do feel like he could be a third level threat in the right scheme. And obviously this one is going to be moving everybody around and pushing it down the field as much as possible under Phil Longo.
Yeah, a couple things stood out to me here. The red zone ability you mentioned, catching in traffic, being able to shield off a defender, make tough hands catches. Oklahoma State used them a lot in the red zone, throwing fades to them. That feels like a way that Phil Longo is going to create some mismatches for opposing Big Ten teams with a guy like Green.
That's a great point, and he was also kind of the gadget guy for Oklahoma State this past year, which means there's a lot of trust, game planning wise. There's a lot of trust and polish to be assumed within his game, whether it's his route running, his discipline, coming off as a blocker and then releasing whatever it may be. A lot of trust behind what OSU was able to put on Green pre-snap. So, yeah, I think those roles are potentially ones to magnify even more at a program like Wisconsin that's still basically trying to figure this thing out based on a wide receiver depth chart and room that is massive. It's got a lot of variance within it, varying levels of experience on top of it. So I think it'll be fun to figure out who in the world wide receiver 1 is going to be. And then thereafter, it's like there's a battle at every single spot. And in this type of system, if you are a top 3 or 4 receiver, you're a borderline starter. You're a guy who's going to be counted upon very heavily. You're going to move around and you're going to get your shots and your samples. So as long as you're in that top 4, you're good. Green safely will be in that top 4, we would assume at this point. But I think he's got a chance, a puncher's chance to be that number 1 guy. And I think that's part of the reason why he took a chance on himself coming up to Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's a good point too that you brought up with Longo's system. Really, if you're in that top 4, you're basically a starter. And Phil Longo actually mentioned he wants multiple. Not, I don't know if the word he used was waves, but with the way he runs his offense and the amount of mileage his receivers put into a game, he wants 6 or 7 that are going to play a lot. So it's just a mindset difference for Wisconsin fans in general.
Yeah, exactly. Not a whole lot of 21 personnel with 2 wideouts out there. This is going to be 3 on most occasions, 4 on plenty of occasions. And yeah, there will be a rotation. Absolutely. There'll be basically a market share between all these receivers and their backups relative to their final projected positions. So all of that will be fun to sort out and watch as the Badgers go through spring ball. But we know, again, the tempo is going to be high on top of this. The quarterback's going to be experienced as well. So you're going to be, I think, judged pretty quickly, which is a good thing, right? The cream's going to rise to the top or it won't. So you'll get this combination of guys that buy in and fit in immediately, or those that kind of get passed up along the way, whether it's physically or mentally, because they got to install a whole heck of a lot here in the next few months.
And this is a player, we're talking about Green now. I mean, CJ Williams, you could probably fit into this mold as well, but Green was the guy that Oklahoma was heavy after, among other schools. Oklahoma, obviously synonymous with Ole Miss. Both those places synonymous with big receivers, big offenses, good quarterbacks,
and tempo too.
Tempo, right?
Yeah.
And smart offensive minds. Are we at the point where we shouldn't be necessarily surprised when Wisconsin is taking a receiver? This is new to us, but we would never have taken a receiver from Oklahoma before.
Right, especially a kid with ties to that conference and that part of the country in particular. I think that's a very good point. But yeah, when you think of those fast-paced offenses, it's going to be Ole Miss, it's going to be Oklahoma, it's going to be Texas, USC, Washington. Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to start to put Wisconsin, at least in principle, in that type of category. Teams that want to go in incredibly fast and put as much pressure on you as possible, and that's ultimately the goal. That's why you bring in a Phil Longo. Again, he had a good situation at North Carolina. He absolutely could have stayed put and probably continued to build upon not only great quarterback production, but churning out wide receivers with a chance to play on Sundays. He could have easily hung in a beautiful town in Chapel Hill and done that. But when you make a move like this, it's to up the level of competition and to maybe increase or raise your ceiling. So there's a sense, and this ambitious transfer portal haul is a great first step in, hey, this is a team going for it right now. This is not one that is going to quote unquote rebuild and transition and go very slow from the ground up. It's more like a renovation as opposed to a rebuild, right? It's just a tweaking. Hey, let's update this kitchen and bathroom and then put this thing back on the market and see where we stand. I think that's what the portal affords good programs to do, and Wisconsin's taking advantage of it about as well as anybody.
Yeah, that's really well said in terms of just renovating vice rebuilding. Because we're going to get into that a little bit next segment, but you bring in a Mordecai, a Renfro, a Green, those are win now moves, whereas some of the other moves are maybe win later. I think Fickle has done a great job of balancing both aspects of that. But I want to get into that a little bit next segment. I do want to finish here with Bryson Green. I feel like we've talked about quarterbacks being drawn to Longo. Is the system the draw for receivers typically, or is it the quarterback? What's the bigger deal here to get those guys? I know it's hard to separate them completely, but
yeah, no, I actually think it's the system. Great quarterbacks come and go. It's hard to go from great quarterback to great quarterback. But when both are in line, you're going to have a whole lot of success. I mean, again, look at the programs that we just mentioned that are kind of known for that tempo and that production. You could almost plug and play quarterbacks and receivers alike within some of these systems and see at least similar results. So I do think the system is attractive here. And I think Phil Longo gets the assist a little bit more than Tanner Mordecai. But again, Bryson Green played ball at Allen, Texas in high school, the biggest high school stadium in the country under those Texas Friday Night Lights, very aware of what a Tanner Mordecai was doing at Oklahoma and SMU. So it's not something to undersell. But look, Phil Longo, I believe was one of the first coaches to offer him several years ago as a high schooler, and this is another indicator that he's very good at maintaining relationships, which is the new norm, right? We used to joke in the industry about signing day being like National Unfollow Day. We can unfollow 200 recruits that we've been tracking on Twitter. Can't do that anymore. So imagine that the coaches going through that in a similar fashion. You've built all these relationships. You kind of got to maintain them because you just never know when it can come back around via the portal or another situation, years down the line. And in this case, 3.5 years later, these two, get to reunite from a relationship standpoint and kind of see what they got going on together. So, yeah, Phil Longo, again, it can't be overstated what his impact has meant already from a tangible perspective and what that reach will enable you to get to from a recruiting prospect perspective down the line if some of these things work out.
Yeah, that's an excellent point regarding the relationships and having to maintain them for when the player inevitably maybe doesn't work out the first time and then enters the portal. That's an excellent point. All right, coming up, I do want to zoom out a little bit. We're going to pick your brain, John, and look at where Wisconsin falls within the Big Ten in terms of their transfer class. Are they at the top, somewhere in the middle? Plus, who else in the Big Ten has been doing really well there? We're going to talk about that next coming up on Locked On Badgers. But first, today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at Built Bar. Built Bar, has been one of my favorites to go to for a long time. And if you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories, you got to try Built Bar. We just got through the holidays. I know my goal is to eat a little healthier. And if you're like me, when you eat a little healthier, you don't want to compromise taste. You don't want to eat things that taste like cardboard just to get some protein, just to get something that's a little more nutritious. You want that nutritious, delicious combo. And that's where Built Bar really is. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, 100% real chocolate. Boom. 100%. And they come in unbelievable flavors. My favorite's the churro, but you got peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. I don't know how they do it, but these bars taste like candy bars. My kids love them. They get some protein without getting all that candy bar terribleness inside of them. And now you don't have to go and order a box. You can go out and get it at a brick and mortar store, Sam's Club, Walmart. Go to Walmart and get your 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut puffs. Go to Sam's Club, get the 13-bar variety box. You're going to thank me later. Built Bar, it is the way to go. I also want to thank everybody for tuning into Locked On Badgers. When you're done here, go check out Locked On College Basketball today. All the biggest college basketball stories in one spot, like only Locked On can provide. And then let's get John Garcia back in here. And John, as always, because people are smarter when knowledge is shared, where can they find your incredible work, my friend?
Yeah, we've got a ton of work to do here on the Locked On podcast. We're building another one. CFB Nation State of Recruiting is what we're calling it. So yeah, just track everything on Twitter. That's the easiest way to figure it out at John Garcia _JR.
I love it. John, so we get very into the details of Wisconsin here. Obviously, Wisconsin show, we got another guy. They love this guy. We love this guy. Let's zoom out. Big Ten in general. Where would you put Wisconsin's transfer class this year among the Big Ten?
So far, and the portal window is open for another couple days, and then it'll open again in the spring. But in terms of this first portal window, December into mid-January, I've got Wisconsin with the number 1 Big Ten transfer portal class. It's got that nice combination, Ryan, of guys who have star power and will be starters. You mentioned it earlier, at conservatively 3 no-doubter day 1 starters already in this class. You start to bring in these receivers. It's going to be 4, 5, 6 somewhere in some capacity with those guys as well. And then some that will fight and contend for number 1 or 2 deep spots right out of the spring season. I do like some of these other Big Ten transfer classes from a volume perspective. Indiana's, got the biggest one, and they probably brought in their starting quarterback as well in Taven Jackson, which I think is great relative to the other guys they got. A lot of upside guys that have to be developed. Same thing for Michigan State and Michigan, which probably have the more comparable classes to Wisconsin's. The difference is I don't know how many clear-cut starters those programs have brought in, and Wisconsin's got a little bit more volume and variance thereafter. Michigan it was a reinforcement of maybe some positions they lost, so kind of getting back to that even number. And I think with Michigan State, just like the last couple years, rolling the dice, players from all over the place, Obviously, a couple of Wisconsin Badgers headed to East Lansing once again for the second year in a row. And then some high upside young guys that we'll see in a couple years how they stack up. But Wisconsin's got that combination of no-brainer starters, right? Tanner Mordecai obviously, leads that list. Renfro is one other that is a no-brainer according to what he is saying publicly. I really like that aspect, but then you've got the balance and the depth thereafter. Again, just go back to the quarterback position. You've got your quarterback of the present in Mordecai and at least two contenders for whatever happens thereafter. And they provide variance within themselves between the two. So I do think it's fascinating to see what they've put together. And yeah, I'd put this as the best transfer class in the Big Ten to date. Again, second in volume, but for me, first in star power and first in day one starters. Even though, again, some of these other programs are going to hit the portal a little bit harder here in the next few days to close it out, and then of course once again in the spring.
And then talk to me a little bit more about Matt Rule, Nebraska. Wisconsin fans look to our West, even though the Big Ten West is going to be going away, but they're in the West with us. They also brought in a new high-powered coach. And Nebraska traditionally has a habit of, I don't want to say winning the offseason, but they tend to bring in a lot of pretty good profile players. Where are they at in this cycle a little more specifically?
Yeah, I think defensively, they've got a really strong group, right? A great pass rusher in Elijah Judy. MJ Sherman at Georgia was this inside-outside linebacker type that ended up cracking the rotation later in his career. I really like Corey Collier, the safety from Miami who came from the Florida Gators. He's one that has some nickel or safety upside, still early in his own development. And then offensively, taking big swings. Jeff Sims could very well be the guy. He could be the top dual threat quarterback, let's say, in the Big Ten before his career is done there in Lincoln. But he still has to kind of ascend to that point, coming off of big injuries in 2022 at Georgia Tech, where he was just kind of beat up, to be honest. So I think he needs a total reset in his own regards. But defensively, as you would expect under Matt Rule, there are some studs coming into this Nebraska class. I just thought Wisconsin had more volume, more star power, and those immediate plug-and-play guys.
And is there a Big Ten school, kind of put you on the spot here, but is there a Big Ten school you look at and wonder why are you either not more active or successful in the portal?
That's a great question. I always wonder about the programs that you feel like are kind of in one level and it's hard for them to budge even if they win. I mean, Northwestern is kind of like a poster child for that. You get to the Big Ten title game a couple of years ago, and does your recruiting ceiling move a whole lot? Does your portal ceiling move? I don't think so. I think you're more likely to get poached than to go out and grab great transfer portal players. And I know academics do play a part in that to some degree. But the biggest head scratcher among the schools that we think have a more consistent chance at getting to Indianapolis, Iowa and Penn State, a combined 7 portal commitments at this point, Ryan, a bit surprising. Penn State, to me, feels like they're treading water. I know the offense is going to feel a little bit different with Drew Aller next year. Big fan of his game, so maybe it opens up a little bit more. But they always seem like they're 2 or 3 plays away, so in essence, a couple players away from making that final leap and getting over the hump. And then Iowa, obviously, look, the jokes, the perception of that offense in particular, to me, 3 months ago, I would have said they're going to go crazy in the transfer portal, telling guys, hey, come here and help us fix this thing right now. And it worked with, I think, 2 starters, Cade McNamara and Eric All, both coming from Michigan. And I think those make a lot of sense. But those are pro-style kind of conventional guys. I'm surprised Iowa hasn't gone a little bit more outside the box to try to update things. It didn't have to be as drastic as Wisconsin, going from similar to totally wide open. Let's see how this thing is basketball on grass next year. But at least another step in that direction where you're bringing in more dynamic skill position players to start to balance out with what you always have seemingly in great offensive line play and great backfields.
That's a great answer. And by the way, it's kind of funny as a Wisconsin fan to point to Iowa and say, yeah, why don't you upgrade that offense, get a little more, right? We've been locked up with them for 25 years as like, no, the pro style works. It's okay. And now we're like, hey, that's really old. Nah. Anyway, coming up, we have one more fun segment on Locked On Badgers. We're going to continue talking about big picture transfer portal stuff, a bunch of new quarterbacks in the Big Ten West. Where does John think maybe those quarterbacks rank out? Who does he like the most? Who has the most upside potentially in their new system? We're going to talk about that next on Locked On Badgers. Welcome back to Locked On Badgers. Really do appreciate you taking the time, tuning in, making this one of your first listens every day. We got John Garcia Jr. on, always smarter because he joins us. John, the Big Ten West loaded up on quarterbacks this year. Obviously, we've talked a ton about Wisconsin, but you mentioned Cade McNamara going to Iowa. Illinois just got their quarterback. It was Altmaier out of Ole Miss.
Yep.
You have Jeff Sims. You talked about Nebraska. And then there's also Hudson Card going to Purdue. Talk to me a little bit about, this group of quarterbacks and maybe the best combination of landing spot talent, production, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, obviously, I love Tanner Mordecai to Wisconsin. I mean, I think that from a fit perspective, paired with Phil Longo, and now all of a sudden these receivers, that we could start to up the expectation offensively from the Badgers right out of the gate. I think that's the best situation. The sneaky one to me is Hudson Card. I think this is a phenomenal deal when you go from Jeff Brom to not an offensive laden perceptional staff. You're thinking, okay, what is going to change? Is it going to be a total overhaul? But then when you bring in a Hudson Card, the answer is no, right? Because this is a versatile, athletic, big arm quarterback who can do a lot of things. I think he is going to be kind of the sleeper quarterback in the Big Ten this year. I thought he had very high upside in the portal. And at one point, Notre Dame buzz, Ole Miss buzz for Hudson Card. I just think the pool got a little deep with really experienced and strong quarterbacks in the portal itself. And then I really like Luke Altmaier to Illinois. I thought that obviously defensively they're a step above just about anybody else in the conference at the moment. So it's about countering on the other side of the ball. And I think Altmaier provides a little bit more juice than Tommy DeVito. No disrespect. I just saw he hit the portal and is now going to be on the market again. But Luke Altmaier can absolutely play. This was an Elite 11 kid in high school, longtime Florida State commitment before their coaching change to Mike Norvell, ends up flipping to the home state Ole Miss Rebels. And you go 12 months ago, and Luke Altmaier is coming off of a start in the Sugar Bowl against Baylor, and he is kind of leading the conversation of, hey, he's going to replace Matt Corral for Lane Kiffin. So here we go. And then they brought in Jackson Dart, and that became a truly nip and tuck battle. And I think the reason Dart won out was his overall athleticism compared to Altmaier, but everything else pointed in Luke's favor. So that chip on his shoulder has only grown from this point. And again, now that offense has, to me, more of an opportunity to open up a little bit. We know they're going to run the football with Brett Bielema. I mean, that's obviously this audience knows that, no brainer in that regard. But I do think they can open it up a little more with the quarterback play that they're not going to have with Luke Altmaier. He's accurate. He can push to the second level very consistently. So I think he can open it up a little bit for the Fighting Illini there.
Is there, from my perspective, it felt like Iowa, and we talked to McNamara a little bit coming over from Michigan. Maybe they didn't, and I think you mentioned this in the previous segment as well. I don't know if they pushed hard enough to find a guy that could elevate. It feels like McNamara is more of a solid guy.
And I think he was like the first quarterback to commit in the portal. I mean, it was like that deal was not deal, but that situation was wrapped up before all hell broke loose with all these other quarterbacks and all these other starting quarterbacks that ended up in the transfer portal. You kind of wonder if Iowa could do it all over again. Do they maybe slow down with that process? But look, in terms of continuity, Cade McNamara absolutely fits that conventional pro-style system. He's going to take care of the football. He's going to play accurate, carry out his fakes, manage the game, all the things that Michigan has done so well over the last couple of years. But even Jim Harbaugh was like, look, I got to go with the high upside guy. I got to go with the guy who's a little bit more athletic in J.J. McCarthy. So that puts McNamara kind of in that box, that old school box that is phasing out of college football in a lot of cases. It still works here and there, but you got to have pieces around you. And I don't know for Cade, I don't know how many of those pieces he's going to have at Iowa right out of the gates. Because, look, it's not like Michigan was lighting it up from a wide receiver standpoint. They're more tight end, certainly running back, laden in terms of their offensive production. So he's going to get a step back from even that at Iowa. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. This is Kirk Ferentz and Brian Ferentz, I guess at this point, tripling and quadrupling down on what they know and sticking with it to the highest degree. So, yeah, that one was curious when it happened because of how quickly it all developed. And I think in hindsight, yeah, I think both parties maybe could have benefited from slowing down, because I'm sure Cade McNamara is like, man, I was in this box and now I'm in this box even more. Like, he moved more to the center of that pro style conventional box than he ever could have been at a pro style scheme like Michigan. So yeah, I think for him, you kind of hope he can figure out a way to keep Iowa a little bit more opened up for his cases. But yeah, I just don't see as much of a ceiling there relative to the talent that Iowa's going to have surrounding him.
And final question on the quarterbacks, and then we'll let you go. As always, with a great guest, we run out of time well before we run out of questions. If scheme was the same for all these players, the fit was the same, which quarterback has the highest upside of this group? Who's the most talented? Is that Hudson Card, in your opinion? That feels kind of like that to me, but I definitely want your take on that.
Yeah, it's Card or Sims, I think. They have the element of multiple years of eligibility, so I do think that adds a little bit of points to that theoretical decision. Obviously, Mordecai, the oldest, most experienced of the bunch. But look, from a floor perspective, I'll take Mordecai. From a ceiling perspective, I'd probably go Jeff Sims, but injuries and we'll see what that roster looks like and that scheme under Matt Rule. Very curious to see. Like, a lot of things need to align for him. I think Card can be a little bit more free, so we might see a little bit more from Card versus Sims in 2023, in my opinion.
Awesome stuff as always. He is John Garcia Jr. Go follow him on Twitter. For everyone else tuning in, thank you so much for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. We got more content. I think we'll go live tonight. We got a basketball game and talking with Rajiv is jumping on the show. So as always, content's coming. We'll get John Garcia on again because he is a fan favorite on Wisconsin, and we'll talk to y'all tomorrow.